I follow a lot of prizes, and in my opinion, the best long list of 2023 belonged to the Jhalak prize. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the 2024 long list. Quickly, for those of you who do not know or require a reminder, the Jhalak prize is a British book prize aimed at amplifying the voices of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic authors. Each year they announce a long list of 12 books, and it will be a mixture of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. Usually the books are all quite different too, catering to different reading tastes. I am just going to be looking at the adult prize in this video because that's what I talk about on this channel. But they also do a children's and young adult prize, and I know that quite a few of you are interested in that sort of fiction too. So if that's you, it is well worth checking that out. Also, just a slight public service announcement, the Jhalak Prize website gives you 5% off all the titles. I think you have to be in the UK to get that because the prices are listed in pounds. I'm not paid to say that, I just thought you might like to know as I discovered it when I was looking up the details of this prize. This year I've read 3 books from the long list. They certainly excite me to read the other 9 books. I'm going to read out a brief description of each book and then let you know my thoughts on the title. And we're going to start with River Spirit by Layla Alabulia. 1880s Sudan, when Akuni and her brother are orphaned in a village raid. They are taken by Yassine, a young merchant whose vow to care for them will tether him to Akani throughout their lives. As revolution brews, Sudan begins to prize itself from its Ottoman rulers, and everybody must choose a side. Yassine feels beholden to stand against the self-proclaimed Mahdi, a decision that threatens to splinter his family. Meanwhile, Akuni grows into womanhood and travels alone across the fractured country, sold and traded from house to house, with only Yassine as her intermittent lifeline. Their struggles will mirror the increasing bloody struggle for Sudan itself, for freedom, safety, and the possibility of love. This is one of the books that I have already read. For me, this was quite a mixed book. There was a little bit too much going on for me to focus on everything. It was just a bit too complex for me to digest everything, but it really does raise some very interesting issues around the state Sudan was left in by various groups who were not Sudanese, that is, the Commonwealth and the Ottomans. It also discusses slavery, as well as dealing with the clash of old and the newer modern ways of doing things, the complex nature of war, picking sides, art, love, and growing up. For the right reader, this is a fantastic book. Self-Portrait as Othello by James Allen Passant. In interlocking poems, Self-Portrait as Othello imagines Othello in the urban landscape of modern London, Paris, and Venice, and invites the kind of narrative he might tell about his intersecting identities. Poetic memoir and ekphrastic experiment, Self-Portrait as Othello focuses on a character at once fictional and real. Othello here represents a structure of feeling that was emerging in 17th century Venice and still is with us. Portraying himself as Othello, Allen Passant refracts his European travels and considers the black male body, its presence, its transgressiveness and vulnerabilities. Othello intertwines identity as immigrant and black, which often operates as mutually reinforcing vectors, speaks to us in a landscape of 21st century Europe. Whoever is writing that description needs to put away the thesaurus just a little bit. I much prefer fiction to poetry, but despite the overzealous wording of this blurb, it does sound really interesting, if possibly a little too experimental. Azuka by Nye Awake Parks. A novel about belonging in a world where all things are on the move. People, ideas, food, and not least music. Oswald Colley Obichu Jr., henceforth known as Junior, that is with a U instead of a J, leaves his family in Accra to travel to the mythical Caribbean island of Fumaz, where the revolutionary philosophy of peopleism just about keeps its flame alive against the forces of an old-style command centre political bureaucracy and a stifling trade blockade from the big imperialist neighbours to the north. Unya brings the knowledge of the scientists, the skill of the farmers, and the heart and inventions of a musician to the life in Fumes. As scientist, he must find some way of rescuing the island's famed sweet rice industry from collapse. As a farmer, he sees how much his West African food has journeyed across the Atlantic to make the island cuisine. As musician, he becomes part of the spirit that puts the island on the world stage, out of all proportioned to its size. This is a novel of ideas. How much is accidental in the world and how much can be planned? It has much to say about the impact of colonialism on the fragile ecology of the island, but it is the purest of loves and the tragedy of death, the interweaving of moments of harmony and moments of conflict, and the motives of vividly drawn characters that are the drivers of this somewhat zany narrative. And there is always the texture of the language to enjoy in a book whose prose is as flowing, elegant and heartfelt as the music that moves freely back and forth across the seas between Africa and the Caribbean. I mean, that sounds pretty amazing, I think. I'm concerned that there isn't that much of a plot here, which I usually like a plot to create some form of tension to keep me interested while the author creates their themes and their characters. But the exploration of the African influence on the Caribbean is really underexplored and hopefully will allow us to get an idea of the range of cultures and the similarities and differences between the African and Caribbean cultures as well. It sounds like a really worthwhile novel. It's a novel I would gladly spend money on instead of using my library. Unfortunately, it is difficult for me to find a copy either online or at my library. And I hope that this prize will mean that this book gains the necessary popularity to lead to a more international release. By the way, the title means sugar in Spanish for those of you who are monolingual like myself. Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. Dancing is the one thing that can solve Stephen's problems. At church with his family, the shimmer of black hands raised in praise. With his band making music, speaking not to their hardship but to their joy, grooving with his best friends, so close their heads might touch, dancing alone to his father's record, uncovering the parts of a man he has never truly known. His youth, shame and sacrifice. Stephen has only ever known himself in song, but what becomes of him when the music fades? This is one of the books that I have already read, and I thought it was a very good novel, although it is very similar and not quite as good as Azuma Nelson's first novel, Open Water, which I think everybody who likes emotionally driven literary fiction, romance, or a book about race and the relationship between black people and the police should read. I know that this is only Caleb Azuma Nelson's second book, but he is the type of author that doesn't really raise any eyebrows when he makes a long list. It's almost a bit boring now already. He is in that elite group of authors that we expect to get long listed. We expect to see him at the pointy end of various prizes throughout the year. He is of a high ilk, and his writing proves that. 12 Words for Moss by Elizabeth Jane Burnett. Glowflake, Rocket, Small Skies, Kind Spears, Marilyn. Moss is known as the living carpet, but if you look really closely, it contains its own irrepressible light. In 12 Words for Moss, Jane Elizabeth Burnett celebrates the unsung hero of the plant world with a unique blend of poetry, nature writing, and memoir. Making her way through wetlands from Somerset to County Tyrone, Burnett discovers the hidden vibrancies and the luminous beauty of these overlooked places. She also takes strength from them as she recovers from her grief at her father's death. As she meditates on and renames her favourite species of moss, she finds a healing power in language and draws inspiration from the resilience and tenacity of her plants and humans and friends. Looking at the title, I thought this was just going to be nature writing, but what an interesting concept for a book blending poetry and memoir in with it too. To be honest, I just don't know what to expect. I have never seen these genres together before. I could see them working very well together, but I honestly have no idea. A curious book I know some of you will jump out and buy immediately. It's a really good one to know that it exists, because I think it is the perfect book for the correct mood. Bright Fear by Mary Jean Chan. Through poems which engage fearlessly with interwoven themes of identity, multilingualism, and post-colonial legacy, Chan's work explores a family's evolving dynamic, as well as microaggressions stemming from queerphobia and anti-Asian racism that accompanied the COVID pandemic. Yet Bright Fears remains deeply attuned to moments of beauty, tenderness, and grace. It asks how we might find a home within our own bodies, in places both distant and near, and in the constructed space of the poem. The contemplative central sequence, Arc Poetica, traces radial healing and transformative roles of poetry during the poet's teenage and adult years, accumulating in a polyphonic reconciliation of tongues. Another publisher that is fond of a thesaurus. Is it something to do with poetry publishers? Chan is someone I'm aware of only because they were a judge for last year's Booker Prize, and this does sound like a very impressive poetry collection. Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. Yamini lives for the weekend when she can go raving with her friends at The Crypt, an underground club on the outskirts of London. Then everything changes. Yamini meets Moose. She falls deeply in love with him, and he offers her the chance of freedom and escape. After their relationship is brutally cut short, Yamini goes on a dynamic journey of transformation that leads her to Jamaica, where past and present collides with explosive consequences. Shortlisted for last year's Women's Prize, this is an exciting, high-octane novel that I found an absolute joy to read. It satisfied the escapist side of my reading taste, yet it was super emotional and deep, and dealt with some big real-world issues. I hate saying that any book is highbrow or lowbrow, but if you were to describe books like that, I think you can safely say that Fire Rush is multi-browed. I have a real love for a book like this that can offer you different experiences depending on what type of reader you are or what sort of mood you are in. It often culminates in enjoying the book in multiple different ways. If I were to have one criticism of the book, it is that it's slightly too high-paced for me. It didn't let me sit on things enough. Maybe if I had have read it a bit slower, it would have been the perfect read for me, but I'm not sure. And overall, I think it's just a fantastic book that I think a lot of readers will enjoy it if you have yet to pick this one up. How do you know this is all real and happening? How can you be sure you haven't already died in an earthquake? Are you just living in the afterlife? In this highly anticipated English language debut, Yan Ji explores isolation in 9 iridescent, witty and wondrous tales, both contemporary and ancient, real and surreal. The stories in Elsewhere range from China to Dublin to London to Stockholm. From a group of riders lounging on the edge of a disaster zone to a mandarin ostracized from his old court trying to avoid assassination. And from a woman who inexplicably loses her voice to a couple who meet all too fleetingly at a cinema in Dublin. These are strange and beguiling stories of dispossession, longing, and diasporic experiences. There's a lot of praise for these short stories from a lot of people, including authors such as Sarah Hall, Matt Bell, and Madeline Tynes. A Flat Place by Noreen Mazood. Noreen Mazoon has always loved flatlands. Her earliest memory is of a wide, flat field glimpsed from the back seat of her father's car in Lahore. As an adult in Britain, she has discovered many more flat landscapes to love. Oxford Ness, the Cambridgeshire Fens, Morecambe Bay, Orkney. These bare, haunting expanses remind her of the flat place inside herself, the place created by trauma. Noreen suffers from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, the production of a profoundly disruptive and unstable childhood. It flattens her emotion, blacks out parts of her memory, and colours her world with anxiety. Undertaking a pilgrimage around Britain's flatlands seeking solace and belonging, she weaves her impressions of nature's world with poetry, folklore and history, and with reconciliation of her own life. Noreen's British Pakistani heritage makes her a particular outsider in these landscapes, both colonizer and colonized, inheritor and dispossessed. Here violence lies beneath the fantasy of pastoral innocence, and histories of harm are interwoven with nature's powers to heal. Here, as in her own family's history, are many stories that resist the telling. She pursues these paradoxes fearlessly across the flat, haunted space she loves, offering a startling, strange, vivid, and intimate account of the land beneath her feet. This book was also longlisted for the Woman's Prize for Non-Fiction. 2 excellent prizes, longlisting this book, and maybe shortlisting or even letting this book win. We don't know yet, but regardless of how far it goes in either prize, that is a compelling reason to pick up this book. This just sounds like an interesting way to write a memoir. I don't read a lot of non-fiction, but this one has really caught my eye prior to this long list, and it just makes it even more delectable to read. Boundary Road by Amy Rayo. A story of colliding lives, begulging opportunities, and reckless illusions. A compelling blend of comedy and tragedy, love, desire, fear, and dreams on a London bus. We're on the 13, heading for Boundary Road. People get on and off, leaving something of themselves behind. But 2 passengers have pasts they cannot escape. People can't stop talking, a giddy cocktail of monologues, dialogues, memories, and gleeful anticipation. It's amazing what people will say to total strangers. Suddenly the unsayable just trips off the tongue, and there's so much feeling behind it. Hours of thought, sprinkled with melancholy or sharp blades of aggression, while some just accept what life offers, others react with dangerous determination. A man haunted by his past and the many pasts of his family, but in love with the present. He's charming, but he's got a secret waiting to catch up with him. A woman stifled by lack of affection, but determined to do what's right. A man obsessed with architecture and in love with a painting. For most, it's a liberating opportunity to exchange confidences with a stranger, but for 2 passengers, this journey will be unexpectedly life-changing. Well, that sounds like a very weird premise for a book. I'm quite confused by this description because why is this book published? And the fact that it is published is kind of exciting because what's it saying, what's it doing? It's clearly going to be quite a plotless book, but we're not really sure what it's going to be discussing, what the themes are, and this description has very much left that unsaid. So it is a curiosity. A Pebble in the Throat by Ashma Mir. The coming-of-age story of Ashma Mir's childhood growing up in the 1970s Glasgow. From a vivacious child to a teenage loner, Ashma candidly shares the highs and lows of growing up between 2 cultures, trying to fit in at school and retreating to a safe haven of a home inhabited by her precious but distant little brother and Helen, her family's Glaswegian guardian angel. Intricately woven into a moving memoir is the story of Ashma's mother as we follow her own life as a young girl in 1950s Pakistan to 1960s Scotland and beyond. Both mother and daughter fight and are defeated and triumph in different battles in this sharp and moving story. A Pebble in the Throat is a remarkable memoir about family identity and finding yourself where you are. This was shortlisted for the Scottish National Book Award, which I didn't know existed until I started making this video, but now I will instantly be following from this point onwards. A clash between Pakistani and Scottish cultures. They are 2 of my favourite cultures to read about, 2 of my favourite locations to pick books up from, even without the added deliciousness of how jaggedly those 2 cultures fit together. That sounds good. Anybody who is not a little bit interested, not a little bit curious about this book needs a dose of imagination. I think it sounds great. Every non-fiction book on the long list so far has been a memoir. Also, one of the poetry collections is arguably a memoir too. They all sound captivating, but this last book is a non-fiction book that isn't a memoir, and it sounds just as captivating as the other books on the list, maybe even more so. Anasani's Gold, The Man Who Swindled the World by Jhalak. When Ghana declared independence from Britain in 1957, it immediately became a target for opportunists determined to lay hold of whatever assets colonialism hadn't already stripped. The military ousted the new nation's first Prime Minister, Kwame Nkrumah, then falsely accused him of stealing the country's gold and hiding it overseas. Into this story stepped one of the history's most charismatic scammers, John Accra Blay Meza, a conman to rival the trickster god Anasani. Born into poverty, declaring himself the custodian of the alleged Nkrumah's trust fund worth billions. You too could claim a piece, if only you help rescue it with a small investment. Over the 1970s and 80s, he grew his scam to epic proportions, amassing hundreds of millions of pounds and thousands of marks all over the world. He baffled Henry Kissinger, scandalized Shirley Temple Black, and had Nixon's former Attorney General at his beck and call. Many tried to stop him, but he continued to live in luxury, protected by an ex-SAS soldier, while he deceived lawyers, businessmen, and investors around the globe. In Anasani's Gold, Jhalak chases the ever wilder trail of Blay Meza's and unfolds the riveting account of the Cold War entanglement of African dreams, revealing the untold story of a grifter who beat the West at their own thieving game. I mean, if you don't want to read that book immediately, I don't know how to excite you. Doesn't that sound really, really good? I think the job of any book prize long list is to excite readers into reading that long list, and this is exactly what the Jhalak Prize has done this year. There are books that I know are not to my tastes on this long list, but they sound so imaginative, so well done, and when they're put together with the books that I really want to read, the books that I know are of good quality, it makes me want to read this entire long list. That's a superb job by this year's Jhalak Prize. And I would really love to do that as a reading project, maybe away from the pressures of the shortlisted dates and so on. Now, as always, the caveat with this is if I can get the books, and there are a few very small presses on this long list that don't always have the strongest international arms for obvious reasons. So if I can't get the books, I will just review some of these books in recent reads videos. So if you're not already subscribed and you want to hear about those books, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'd like to thank my Patreons for their support. We read 2 books a month as part of our book club. I appreciate all the support and love I get from my Patreons, who are just wonderful human beings. And if you sign up, it's the perfect chance to talk books with not just me, but with some very interesting and intelligent people from all around the globe. I still got a few book prize long lists to discuss. I'm a little behind on a few things with some events going on in my life. So if you're waiting on certain videos or you want to hear about a certain big name long list that I haven't talked about yet, I promise it's coming soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.